Hello and welcome to another episode of FinTech Focus TV with me, Toby Babb. Today I am absolutely delighted to be joined by Vijay from Rimes. Vijay, how are you?
Good, Toby. How are you doing?
Very good, thank you.
Excellent.
Listen, lovely to have you in.
Good to be here.
Travelled all the way over from the States, so very good to have you over. Some amazing things happening with Rimes at the moment. As I said before, I had possibly about a year ago Theo talking about the AI and capital markets event, Theo Bell from your business, talking a little bit about Rimes and evolution in the space. I imagine a year on, we're going to hear an awful lot of development and how all that's going as well. So we've got a really fascinating conversation to come into. Before we do it, I always ask people to give a brief intro. So if you give a quick introduction to yourself and then the business as well, that'd be great.
Yeah, happy to. So I'm Vijay Mayadas. I am the CEO of Rimes. I've been at Rimes for about 7 months now. Prior to that, I spent a lot of my career in fintech. I was at a large fintech called Broadridge, where I built the capital markets business. And really excited to be in the world of Rimes because so much of what's going on in the industry is about data. It's how do you industrialize data to power not only today's workflows, but also the next generation of AI-driven workflows. So Rimes is right in the middle of that. Think about Rimes as a two-sided network. So we sit in the middle of 850 plus data partners on one side and about 400 customers on the other side. Those customers comprise some of the world's largest asset managers, sovereign wealth funds, pension funds, asset owners. And we manage a lot of the complexity of a very volatile data supply chain, a very important but quite volatile data supply chain, helping these firms understand how to enrich, augment, curate, and develop these data sets from these vendors in a way that can power their mission critical workflows, whether it's rebalancing, trades, whether it's running portfolios at scale, $1 trillion in the case of one asset manager. It's really helping them get access to highly pristine, cleansed data sets that they can use to run mission critical workflows.
I think that's fascinating, isn't it? Because I remember as you were talking there, I sort of took myself back 2 years to an event which we held out in the States, which talked about is if data is the new oil, how ready is your engine? And I feel that was even probably before, it was actually probably before the AI hype really sort of took off, etc. But it's become even more of a conversation, and we all hear, we've heard on this show many times the whole concept of rubbish in, rubbish out. But data seems to be the ever increasingly the turning point about successful adoption or otherwise in the space, and that's exactly where you come into it, right?
That's exactly right. So, and you had an interesting point around how things are changing around data. So typically when, I spend time with, one of our clients, sovereign wealth fund, asset manager, and so on, inevitably the conversation focuses on AI. And there's a tremendous amount of focus on trying to understand what it takes to use these amazing capabilities that are in these frontier models, right? Which are, accelerating, at a dramatic pace. And inevitably in every conversation ends up talking about the data foundations you need to be able to unlock the next generation of automation. Obviously in a very regulated industry like capital markets, which is the world we operate in, the need for pristine, curated, well-governed data with deep lineage is paramount. And there are a lot of discussions going on in the industry around if we're going to start to enable next generation automation, so increasing the speed, increasing the efficiency of processes across the investment lifecycle by 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times. What are the data foundations you need in place to really trust that agentic workflows are going to do the right thing, especially in the context of an environment where there's a lot of focus on compliance and a lot of focus on regulation. There are more and more regulations emerging around lineage, around data sets, around ensuring that if something happens in a workflow, you can go back to the audit trail of data and understand, where that data broke. And that's only going to become more important as you start to drive more and more agentic type workflows. So the majority of conversations I have with clients around AI become data conversations very quickly. And that's where I see a tremendous opportunity for firms to industrialize data, take it to the next level, really think of data as infrastructure, versus content.
I mean, there's a lot to unpack from all of that. And I think as you're talking, the word that keeps on coming back in this sort of conversation is trust, right? And I think back to the evolution of the adoption of digital assets into the space was again around how far do we have trust in digital assets following its links to crypto and everything else around that sort of space. I think in here, I spoke to someone, a sort of fairly leading figure at an investment bank a couple of years ago, who was fairly dismissive, as he was about digital assets, and was, you could argue how well he's been proven rightly or wrongly in this sort of space. He was saying the problem about AI in capital markets is approximately right isn't good enough, and that was as I say, that's probably a conversation that's been buzzing in my head for a couple of years now. As we evolve, I think people are recognizing that there is a overwhelming opportunity within AI, and there's an overwhelming responsibility to get the underlying parts of that right to make that more trusted and more valuable. And as that's happened more and more over the last couple of years, people are able to adopt it and do the things which we want to do in it. I feel that this is, I've said this on the show many times before, that I think the real excitement for me is about the increase in productivity in the space, as well as the last however many, nearly 20 years of really focusing on efficiency and cost reduction. There's obviously that element to AI, but also the explosion in productivity on a per head basis about what we can do with this is the thing where I get really excited. To have that happen in its truest sense obviously needs this trust to evolve into it. And I feel that's where you're uniquely well positioned for it, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's right. And look, Rimes has been in the business of providing trusted data sets to clients for about 30 years now, right? So we have very deep experience understanding what our clients want. If they have specific things they want to do with data, customization of index blends, for example, enrichment of data sets, we have a very deep domain expertise to enable that to happen for our clients, right? And what's happening now, to your point, is that trust has always been non-negotiable. But the issue now is that if there's an issue with any of the data and you are investing in next generation AI type workflows, the risk of errors propagating very quickly is much higher, right? Yeah. So we sort of come from a world where, machine learning is used quite prolifically, throughout buy-side firms, but enabling generative AI models with reasoning capabilities to take action with a level of human oversight, but not too much human oversight, because otherwise you can't scale. That world is demanding a new paradigm around how data gets managed, right? And so the concept we have, which we talk to clients a lot about, is this concept of decision grade data, right? So at what point do you feel that you have enough trust, you have enough explainability, you have enough lineage in your data sets that you can start to trust agents to act more and more autonomously across the investment lifecycle, right? Yeah. And that's a real white space, right, for discussion with clients and for, obviously, firms to really lean into and help think through that opportunity. And it's also reframing, it's kind of what I mentioned earlier, reframing what data actually is, right? This concept of data is evolving from being content to being infrastructure, right? Infrastructure obviously implies a level of resiliency, a level of robustness, right? A level of governance that is at the standard we need in our industry, right? That, I think, is the paradigm shift that's happening, in this industry. And, what I've seen out there in the market is a lot of really good POCs around particularly, agentic workflows, but they tend to hit a little bit of a barrier in terms of, well, what's it actually going to take for us to trust this stuff in production, right? And a lot of that barrier, a lot of the constraints, I think, are really driven at the foundational data level, right? And, the analogy, I like to use sometimes is, there's obviously a lot of focus on frontier models, on bringing in these capabilities into the house. But it's sort of like, does it really worth keep upgrading the engine if the fuel is contaminated, right? Yeah. So I sort of think about the data problem, in that context.
And when you're talking about that sort of evolution of the market, when you're talking about people's confidence in being able to adopt this, when you talk about the move from POC to actually implementation, where do you think we are at the moment, and how are people winning in that race?
Yeah. I think there's been a lot of great POCs in the industry. I think people are starting to see the dramatic increases in productivity, frontier models can provide, albeit in very contained sandboxes, right? Yeah. I mean, the obvious one is software development, right? You see agentic workflow in whether it's, Claude Code or anti-gravity, Google's anti-gravity product. You see the power of agentic workflows in software development. And that maybe is the most sort of visceral experience one can have, right? Yeah. In terms of understanding the power of this stuff, right? So I think there's a lot of really good work going on there. We're doing a lot of this stuff, obviously, within Rimes. I think the next question is, okay, beyond software development, right? When it comes to the investment life cycle, what sort of areas are best primed to bring that sort of productivity increase, right, that we're seeing in, for example, software development to other aspects of the investment life cycle? Yeah. And I think there we're seeing a lot of POCs, but it's in that leap where the most amount of challenges arise in terms of these workflows are deeply interconnected, right? There's a lot of compliance mechanisms already built around those workflows, right? And understanding how to take a piece out of that workflow, drive maybe a 10x increase in productivity in a trusted way, and then make sure that you're not disrupting your other workflows. I feel that right now is the areas of, call it, highest complexity, right? For for many firms, right? And so that's a big question. And then the other issue is, you can sort of look at very specific, because every workflow has its own compliance needs in some ways around what you need to get right to run agentic AI, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, if it's a workflow, you're actually making an economic decision, you're defining the status of a trade, which has downstream consequences. There's like a super high bar in terms of compliance, right? If it's a workflow where maybe you're generating content that ultimately is going to be improved by a person, that's a slightly different bar. So I think a lot of firms are going through this process now of trying to unpack all of these different workflows, right? Where do they fall in terms of the sort of autonomy threshold, if you will, right? And then how do I go about sort of, breaking down each workflow, developing a prototype, and then understanding what it takes to go into production. So I think we are in fairly early stages of that whole thought process right now. And of course, in the meantime, these frontier models are moving ahead, even more quickly. Yeah. And so the gap between potential capabilities and the reality of implementing them sort of on the ground, I think, is widening. And I think a lot of that, again, boils down to foundational aspects of data.
Yeah. And people are having to work back on that a lot, aren't they? I mean, I love this catchphrase, and I'm going to read it directly so I don't get it wrong. But the intelligence fabric for capital markets is where you are positioning yourselves within this. And it feels like that is an incredibly important part to get right. And people are starting to realize that more and more from the excitement of saying, right, we need to bring in AI. Yeah. And I always feel it's slightly patronizing to say that, but I feel there's boardrooms that are not far away from that conversation. And then having to re-engineer that backwards afterwards to say, actually, what have we got to get right before it actually works in practice? And a lot of that comes down to that intelligence fabric piece beforehand. Tell me about some of the conversations you're having there to allow people to get to that sort of, level of sage, level of wisdom to be able to bring that together.
Yeah, definitely. So intelligence fabric is really a unifying concept around how you build data infrastructure that solves for the sort of mission critical, highly regulated nature of buy-side workflows, buy-side and sell-side workflows, right? And also reduces the friction for you to run next generation AI on that data, right? Now, what it does is it brings together a couple of concepts. Number one, the ability to aggregate a vaster range of data sets into, to a point where you start off with a very high level of trust, and you have a starting point for data lineage, right? Yeah. So think about it as governed foundation. So I described this two-sided network of 850 plus data partners, 400 customers, right? At some point, someone needs to agree that this is the sort of source of truth around all the data sets that we're aggregating, right? If you're a buy-side firm, if you're, let's say, aggregating 100 data sets, right? This is the sort of truth, the governed source of truth. And I have visibility, transparency into everything that's happening around that data. So that's the foundational kind of starting point, right? Governed data with high levels of observability, so you can kind of see what's happening. If something goes wrong, you understand what goes wrong. You have high levels of lineage. Yeah. Again, you can kind of trace things back to this kind of governed source. So that's the foundation of the intelligence fabric, right? After that, you then start to surface AI-ready data sets, right? So these are data sets that have been enriched, they've been customized depending on what the client wants. They are ready to be used to drive the client's workflows, right? Whether they want to surface the data through an API, whether through an MCP server or directly into a UX for a human, right? So you're creating that level of master data sets that a client can surface with a tremendous amount of optionality in terms of the end use case, agent, machine, or non-agent machine, or human, right? So that's that's the second piece. The third piece is intelligence that you can help the client with on top of that data. So Rimes and of course many other firms will have analytics use cases that clients can run on top of that data, or the clients can develop their own AI use cases, of course, or AI workflows on top of that data, right? And then underpinning all of that is operation. So running this fabric at scale with the right levels of rigor, with the right levels of telemetry, observability, disaster recovery, very important in our industry, and also operational processes that enable you to triage and diagnose issues that happen in the data very quickly, right?
Yeah.
So that's what the intelligence fabric is, really 4 pieces. It's governed data, where lineage starts. It's the mastering and surfacing of AI-ready data sets. It's, use cases on top of that, either yours as a vendor or client use cases, supported by deep operational support, right?
And that sounds a very clear way of putting it. And obviously, when we're seeing this huge wave of AI hype coming through, for want of a better word than hype, I don't necessarily feel like that, but the demand coming through from it is probably a better word. When you've got this AI demand coming through and people wanting to embed it into their businesses and falling back because they're not ready for that sort of stuff, it's a lot of stress around actually implementing it into action. So firms aren't necessarily ready for this at the moment, are they? But it's not a huge leap to get themselves into that sort of position with the right partnerships, I guess.
I think that's right. I think that firms are definitely primed for a different way of thinking about how to unify and simplify their data foundations. There's a level of interest that I've never felt before around this specific topic. Again, driven by how do we actually sort of think about data foundations, right, in the context of rapidly advancing AI. So I think that the need is very much there. In terms of what it takes to get there, that does vary by firm. And there's quite a significant, I would say, sort of dispersion, if you will, in terms of the readiness of firms to build data infrastructure that's going to really be the right thing for them in this next generation of AI.
And what drives that? I mean, is it about their general tech adoption? Because I know there's sort of slightly more old school firms in this space, and there's people there who are constantly looking for alpha. And I can, we probably can both think about the immediate names you think of in both of those categories straight away. But is that what's happening, or is it just about the advance of the team and the technology, the appetite of the senior teams and the PMs in those sort of spaces? Where does that come from, do you think?
Look, it's all of the above, right? And the ingredients or the mix really depend on the firm. I mean, there are definitely some firms, I would say, that have built up their data foundations over time. Like many firms, they have different systems, disparate ontologies, different ways of describing kind of the same thing, all right? Different technical architectures. And all of this fragmentation kind of becomes more and more of an issue as you start to want to drive more and more automated workflows. Because it just becomes hard to kind of create that level of abstraction, if you will, right, that interfaces with the AI, right? So that's where a lot of the problems exist, right? And that there is, I would say, a real sort of mixture, if you will, around investment and sort of historical appetite to think deeply about data foundations and designing data foundations from first principles to solve for the kind of AI capabilities that are coming out right now. I think that's probably the shift right now that a lot of firms are trying to kind of think about. So it's really mixed in terms of where clients are.
And how much does the market play into that as well? Because it's I think in peacetime it's always easier to think longer term and strategically. We've had some fair volatility for one reason or another over the last few months. Probably since the last 7 that you took seat. So to speak.
No doubt. Yeah.
There's not been too much at times where everything's been running normally across the globe. And sometimes I feel that sort of can push things onto a back seat. To me, it feels like this is something there which is more front seat because people recognise the opportunity to get this right and the huge advantages to get this right. It kind of takes me back, 15, 20 years to the zero latency race and all that sort of thing, where people were saying, right, this is our opportunity. Right now, I think the real use case and adoption of AI becomes an advantage for people that feels like people are properly invested to getting that right. Is that something you're seeing, or are you seeing the volatility in the buy side space causing a little bit of looking left rather than right?
I think if
that makes sense.
Yeah. Look, I was at I was meeting with one of our largest clients up in Boston a couple of months back, and they said to me, and they are an equity fund manager. They said to me, the only priority high that's bigger than generating alpha to them is AI, right? So I think that sort of sets the stage around level of priority. In terms of focus, in some ways, volatility surfaces more issues with data. Because in a very volatile market, if you have a problem with a data field, you make an incorrect trading decision based on that, your economic impact could be greater, right? And obviously, if there's an issue with data, you need to remediate that faster in order to react to the volatility that's going on. So in some ways, I think volatility has surfaced more and more issues with underlying data sets, but I think that's been going on for quite a long time, right? But I think a lot of the challenges, it's resourcing and focus. Is probably the primary constraining factor in a lot of our clients, right? Getting really dedicated resources to focus on data foundations, on data strategy, on data roadmaps, on AI roadmaps, and so on and so forth, in the context of a volatile market, which inevitably surfaces issues with the underlying operating model, which have to be dealt with kind of in real time, right? But that, I think, is that's normal now. I mean, I wouldn't expect things to settle down at all. In fact, it could sort of increase, right?
I think this is really interesting because as you're talking, I'm thinking to my day job, the recruitment side of things in this sort of space, and I think we've seen more and more demand over the last year to 18 months within this whole data world. So when you look at the fusion between it's an absolute fusion between AI and data. And more companies who we're working with looking to build AI teams internally, but also beefing up their data teams alongside that and having the two very closely merged together alongside a much more collaborative world of utilizing expert vendors at the same sort of space. That sort of, we've spoken many times in the show about the move from buy or build to buy and build, and to have a collaboration of tools and people looking at various expertise areas within that alongside ever increasing teams. Is that something you're seeing as well when you're talking about people putting their, I guess, money where their mouth is with regards to their investment into AI? It's about building teams as well as investing in the right technology as well.
Yeah, look, I think it's a bit of both, right? Yeah. And no doubt what I've seen is that the budgets firms are allocating to solving data foundations is increasing.
Yeah, absolutely.
At the same time, the ability for firms to do more themselves is also increasing.
Yeah.
So I think for certain types of technology platforms, the pendulum is swinging from build to from buy to build.
Yeah.
Right. And in certain areas, in other areas, it's swinging the other way.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think it's going to take a little bit of time to kind of figure out where exactly the dust will settle on that.
Yeah.
It's only when it comes to the field that I'm in, right, which is sort of mission critical data infrastructure.
Yeah.
There is a view that the complexity of managing data pipelines at scale and dealing with hundreds and hundreds of data partners is something that is challenging to bring that in house, right? So I feel that the pendulum is swinging a little bit more towards how can we partner with specialist fintech companies to do more of that stuff for us?
Yeah.
Which obviously is a good business to be in for us.
Yeah, absolutely.
At the same time, it means that we need to build at Rimes platforms that scale even more to support even more clients, right?
Yeah.
And one of
with even more unique
needs, right?
Absolutely.
And so one of the things we've done to ensure that we are well positioned to drive that next level of demand is our partnership with Databricks, right? We announced this a couple of months back,
right?
I
saw that, yeah.
And we're super excited by that, right? Because Databricks is, I think, a fascinating company. Obviously, very deep heritage in distributed computing with PySpark, very deep heritage in being AI first in terms of designing data platforms that can help with highly scalable machine learning AI workflows, and have invested a lot in a lot of the concepts I talked about, right? Which is embedding things like lineage, explainability, observability deeply into the data infrastructure stack, right?
Mm-hmm.
So as we think about the underlying platform that will give us the ability to kind of scale into the next level of demand, given the focus of these clients on sort of AI workflows or AI first workflows, we think the Databricks platform is fantastic infrastructure for us to build on.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And it sort of ties into this move that we're seeing from managing data to sort of moving to activating governed intelligence. You've spoken about this before in your sort of pillars, I guess. Expand on that a little bit. Yeah.
So governed intelligence for us is the ability to, many of the concepts I talked about before, the ability to trust an agent and understand what the level of data, decision grade data, what that actually means for you to be able to trust more and more agents, doing more and more across your investment lifecycle, right? That's fundamentally what it is, right? And a core part of that, obviously, is governance, right? Governance meaning you have visibility, transparency into exactly what data is being used by what agent, and if there's an error that the agent made, you can trace it directly to, at a very granular level, to the data, ensuring that you have the right permissioning around the data sets. Obviously, as the number of agents your firm is using increases, it sort of tees up very complex permissioning conversations, right? And how you apply those at a very granular level and govern those across your data sets. I mean, many roads lead to the broad topic of governance, which again is best solved at a deep data infrastructure level.
Yeah, and I guess this comes back to this whole concept that happens in so many areas of life, sport, business, military, wherever you look at it. It is the unglamorous stuff that allows the glamorous stuff to happen.
Yeah,
and that feels to me this is the if you get this unglamorous piece right, there's no way that you can do everything that you really want to have happen that can be so transformative in this industry at the same time.
Yeah,
and it's a real important bit to get to the, you mentioned it before, the plumbing, right? Get the plumbing right, everything else can happen afterwards.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, this is critical plumbing. It's becoming more critical to keep those pipes clean, I guess. Given everything that's going on, but that's the right analogy.
I love this piece, and again, I'm going to quote it directly because I think it's a great takeaway from it. That intelligence without trust becomes a liability.
Yeah,
exactly what we've been talking about all the way through here. Right?
Yeah, 100%. And it's the velocity thing. I mean, you're looking for massive speed ups in decision making, massive speed ups in processing, and if you get things wrong at the trust level, those massive speed ups it amplifies issues for you, right? And that's kind of one of the things I think that getting the foundations right really helps solve.
So I've been doing this show weekly now for the best part of 5 or 6 years, and I've been in the industry for the best part of just over a quarter of a century, speaking to people within this whole ecosystem. And what I'm finding more and more is that over the last year or so, I don't think I've ever seen founders, CEOs, C-suite people, in fact, pretty much anyone in the industry who's associated to this world, as excited, as personally invested as at any time over that quarter of a century. You were talking about beforehand about how you've gone back to do a master's in this. It's something there which has become more than just a day job. The energy and the thought and the creativity and the thinking ahead that people are doing at the moment is like nothing I've ever seen before over that sort of period. It's exciting. Give me your take on where this is heading on an industry basis.
Yeah, look, it's really interesting because we had an innovation forum, a couple of weeks back, actually here in London, and we've had a couple of other events. I kind of asked this question, when you think about the level of change in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, on a scale of 1 to 10, like what do you think that looks like, right? And pretty much everyone is like in 10 years, 10 being defined as so dramatic it's probably unimaginable today, right?
Yeah.
So when you think about what it takes to kind of get to that level of change, I mean, I think what we're going to see over the next couple of years is going to be very dramatic and very transformative. Now, we work in a highly regulated industry for very good reason. So we have to be very thoughtful about how we implement these sort of frontier model capabilities. But I would expect to see a pretty dramatic acceleration in provable POCs, in production-ready POCs, in workflows that are fundamentally reimagined in our industry, that will create a next level of scale and efficiency that we've never seen in our careers. And I think that's the opportunity. It also comes with a tremendous amount of risk. And another conversation I have with folks is, what do you think could go wrong? And many things could go wrong, right? I mean, if you start to get agents you don't fully understand, start to act autonomously and make mistakes, I mean, that could be extremely problematic, right? And that goes back to the governance conversation.
But do you think it will be able to get to that sort of stage? Do you think the industry, which had such strong, guardrails all the way through it, will allow it to get to a stage where that gets loose to allow that sort of thing to happen? I think that's a really interesting piece.
Yeah, look, I mean, obviously, I'd like to think that we've got the right, governance in place. The right compliance mechanisms to ensure that doesn't happen. But it is new territory for us.
Yeah, of course.
In many cases, and with newness comes risk.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't surprise me if we do start to see a few things like that happen. Hopefully, they won't be at a really dramatic scale. But it all goes back to ensuring that you have the right governance, the right data, the right processes, the right observability in place. To trust that implementing that kind of level of workflow.
Get that bit right at the start.
Exactly.
And the rest of it happen. Where do you think we'll see the most dramatic impacts? Where do you think the biggest opportunities are?
I think many aspects across the investment life cycle. I think, a lot of areas like sort of reconciliation, a lot of areas around managing trade exception.
Yeah.
I think in operations, triaging and understanding, data pipelines, for example, we think there's a big opportunity there. Obviously, machine learning has been around in areas like portfolio management for many, many years. It's not necessarily got back into other areas in the trade life cycle, like middle office work and back office work. But I think we're going to see a lot more opportunity there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of I mean, we've spoken there about the opportunity, but the barriers to do that, to avoid it, come predominantly in your mind down to trust.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that people would think about, or should be thinking about what stops them to get to that sort of level?
Look, trust is definitely the biggest one. I think there are core, call it foundational architectural constraints that, if core like data architecture, and we're going back to that, is not designed correctly, I think that can be a major inhibitor. So I think it's trust. I think it's architecture. I also think it's the ability for talent, or the next generation of talent, to really embrace these workflows and figure out how to innovate around those workflows. So I think there's a big talent question. That's a topic for another day, maybe. Around how
touch
to
on that, because I do think it's a really interesting piece.
Yeah.
So when we're sat there and we're talking about the right talent for doing this, I think people are sort of dancing around what that actually looks like. In my estimation at the moment, there's, we were talking before about our kids.
Yeah.
Kids coming through at this sort of age. There's certain people who are saying that that's a great advantage, and we're going to invest in the graduate end, because those people have no preconceptions about what life was like beforehand, so they can think on a completely different level. Other areas are saying, right, okay, we need to have that experience, and you have to see this diamond as opposed to a pyramid, where there'll be a big middle, but not an awful lot of investment into entry-level talent coming into the industry.
Yeah.
Do you have a view on what that looks like? Do you think people need to evolve with experience, or I always worry about these sort of areas where, if I go back to when we first launched the business in 2010, there was this missing generation of people who weren't invested into because of 2008. So everyone wanted people. I was doing quite a lot in the fixed world at that sort of stage. Everyone wanted fixed people with 2 years experience. There weren't any.
Yeah.
They just weren't in that sort of space. And I wonder about whether companies are starting to recognize that investment at a junior end is important, or whether that talent is about bringing the best people from other areas, or it suddenly becomes quite a level playing field, in my opinion, and that's quite an exciting position to be in, I think.
It does. I think that the ability for folks to get up the learning curve very quickly, even in very complex areas like sort of investment management workflows, I think that's dramatically accelerated. I mean, you can go to a frontier model, you can generate a course and help me understand the trade life cycle, and it'll be really, really good stuff. So I think you can accelerate the learning curve.
Exactly.
And as I think about sort of the next generation of talent, like what do you need to survive and thrive, I think you do need very deep domain expertise, because you need to ultimately be able to design and judge how well these AI-driven workflows are doing, right? And you need really deep domain expertise. I also think you need a skill of understanding how to use AI responsibly, right? So I think about domain expertise, using AI responsibly. I might argue that those are the two foundational skill sets that the next generation of talent needs. Yeah,
no, absolutely great. I think it's really interesting to see people come into that as well at the same time too. So let's start to wrap up a little bit about where we're going. Give me some exciting stuff. You've been in the business for seven months now. Tell us what the rest of the year looks like. Tell us what's exciting coming up for Rimes.
Yeah, look, definitely. We are, doing a lot of work with Databricks. I think that's super exciting, where we're going to start to migrate a lot of core data pipeline operations onto the Databricks platform, seeing things like 5-10x increases in operational efficiency and speed, generating AI-ready data sets, right, that reduce the friction it takes for an end client to actually run their own AI, agentic AI, and so on these data sets. Super excited about that. We're also disrupting a lot of our own internal processes. So looking at, for example, data implementations, which might have taken 12 to 18 months, taking that down to 2 to 3 months, and then pushing the boundary even beyond that, right? Being a physicist by background, I always love to challenge my team. The ultimate rate limiting step of the laws of physics. So once in a while, just apply that lens and kind of reimagine all of your processes. And we have some kind of great conversations around that. And they're conversations that are in some ways grounded in reality, because I think a lot of what AI is giving us right now enables us to think differently with that kind of lens, and think about a process that might have taken, a certain amount of time, and really shrinking it down to like 90%, 95% of that time. And that is incredibly exciting for us, and obviously for our clients, right? And so we're looking to bring a lot more, I would say, sort of disruptive ways of thinking about data and data processes, which ultimately benefit our clients in a tremendous way, to the market.
Do you know what? It's really encouraging, because I've known Rimes as a business for a long, long time, and actually to see it now, it's something I'm hearing a lot about. There's a lot of excitement, a lot of hype around it. So keep up the great work. It feels like right company, right place. The timing's fantastic for it. You must be loving it. You must be enjoying being on board.
Yeah.
Great stuff. So if people want to reach out and find out a little bit more, I imagine connect with you on LinkedIn. Go to the website, do all of the above. Anywhere else to get in touch with you guys?
That's perfect.
Sounds good.
Great. Thank you, Toby.
Absolutely
Appreciate the
lovely
time.
having you on the show. Thanks so much.
Cheers. Thank you.
And thank you all for watching. We will see you soon on another episode of FinTech Focus TV. Thanks a lot.